Education is preparation for reparations.
Of this panel, Repairing History, Which Paths to Fair Justice, is a hero of mine. I am always so proud of her contribution, not just to Britain, but to our community. Belle, can I hand over to you, please, to facilitate this next session. Please give our panelists a round of applause.
Thank you very much, everybody. My name is Barryl MP, and I'm proud to be the chair of the all-party parliamentary group for African reparations. Thank you. We exist in Parliament to try and push the argument for reparations through those halls, and it's a tough thing to do at the moment, but we're very, very pleased to have the support of many of you. And actually on our panel we have one of our esteemed secretariat today, which we're very pleased for. Now the next panel, and I'm going to go to this quickly because I really want you to hear from our panellists, is Repairing History, Which Paths to Fair Justice. I don't have to tell all of you how many lies we've been told about ourselves and how often how often our stories are distorted, and that distortion helps keep us as far away from justice. And I'm very, very pleased that we have a very, very esteemed panel that's going to talk us through why it's so important to repair that history and how we go about achieving that justice. I'm going to start actually on this panel we've got some international guests, which I think is very, very important. I'm going to start with Dr. Barryl Biekmanm. Is that correct? Thank you very much. Now, Dr. Biekmanm is Dutch.
No, I'm African, living in Holland.
She is, I stand corrected. Dr. Biekmanm is African, living in Holland. Born in Suriname, and she's going to speak to us today. Thank you very much, Dr. Biekmanm.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. I think that we have people in the Zoom. They are maybe just away. So, family, Ubuntu Connected families, distinguished guests, I think that you are honorables. I think Royal Majesties, my comrade from CARICOM, Dr. Phillips, Sister Esther, my teacher. Ladies and gentlemen, family. At the first Pan-African Congress in 1900, there was a Bishop Alexander Walters, noticed in his opening address the trials and tribulations of the colored race in America, that for the first time in history, black people from all parts of the world had come together to discuss the rights, to discuss and improve the conditions of their race, to assert their rights and to organize themselves so that they might occupy an equal place among the nations. Speakers throughout the 3 days covered various aspects of racial discrimination, and among the documents provided were conditions for promoting a high standard of African humanity, the preservation of racial equality, the necessary unity to be established between indigenous races and European settlers, the so-called Negro problem in America, the progress of our people, and Africa, the sphinx of history in the face of unsolved problems. Other topics included Richard Phipps' complaint about discrimination against black people in the Trinidadian civil service and an attack by William Mayer, a medical student at the University of Edinburgh, on pseudo-scientific racism. Discussions followed the presentation of the papers, and on the final day, George James Christian, a law student from Dominica, led a discussion on the topic organized plunder and human progress have made our race their battlefield, saying that in the past Africans had been kidnapped from their lands, and in South Africa and Rhodesia, slavery was revived in a form of forced labor. The conference culminated in the conversation of the African Association into the Pan-African Association and the implementation of a unanimously adopted address to the nations of the world, sent to various heads of states where people of African descent live and were oppressed. The speech implored the United States and the imperial European nations to recognize and protect the rights of people of African descent and to respect the integrity and independence of the free so-called Negro states of Abyssinia, Liberia, Haiti, etc. Signed by Walter's Canadian Reverend Henry B. Brown, Williams, and Dubois. The document included the phrase, "The problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line," which Du Bois would use 3 years later in his book, The Souls of Black Folk. I refer to 37 years later, when in Europe the first series of racial laws were enacted in Europe between 1937 and 1938, called the Manifesto of Race, otherwise referred to as the Charter of Race. It was promulgated by the Italian government. Under the racial laws, sexual relations and marriages between Europeans and non-Europeans were forbidden, as the law considered non-whites as people from inferior race. The law made interracial relationship and marriages a criminal offense. Children born of these relations or marriages were considered as having contaminated bloods and not pure descendants of the Aryan race and not considered citizens. In 1938, a publication titled Manifesto of the Racial Scientist, which mixed biological racism with history and affirmed the need to distinguish between Europeans and non-Europeans. The manifesto encouraged racism, anti-blackness, and exalted white supremacy. A modern-day example of scientific racism and Afrophobia or Afrophobia, forms of multiple racism against African people that refers to the past in context of the Ma'angamisi, is the killing of, we know, the young American man George Floyd in 2020 by a white police officer, knelt for 9 minutes on his neck. Even when he screamed, he could not breathe, leading to his death. And it is only one of the many cases of the brutal policy. And we could observe that despite the end of the jury system of slavery and states' ratification of the UN International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination and other European anti-discrimination policies and measures based on the principle of equality and codified in national constitution, the problem of Afrophobia still persists through a facto system, the de facto system. Racial discrimination remains a major challenge to millions of people of African descent, also defined as indigenous Africans. The pseudo-science and structure on race conceived by, amongst other, Swedish biologist Karel von Linne, constructed the divide and categorized the people of the world in order to defend first the posing of monarchs in the global south, later chattel slavery and racial inequality. It has not been permanently and utterly discredited and are still inflicting people of African descent globally, including people of African descent in Europe and elsewhere, including the diaspora that are not descendants of enslaved Africans and Africans on the African continent. In bringing, I bring into memory the 98 years later, after the 1900 Pan-African Congress, Pan-Africanists, activists, scholars, scientists, lawyers, civil society in all the regions of the world going to the Durban conference, the World Anti-Racism Conference that we have. We unite around the third World Anti-Racism Conference because of the alarming cases of racism against people of African descent worldwide and the fight to get the trafficking and enslavement of African people declared as crime against humanity. And 2 years later, after 1998, 2 years later, we had this conference whereby the trafficking of Africans and slavery were declared as a crime against humanity. And now, 5 years later, after 2001, we have noticed that the Durban Declaration and the program of action were demonized. That means that there was no political will to implement the Durban Declaration and the program of action. We have noticed 9 years after the Durban Declaration that there was still no political will. We had this international decade, the International Year of People of African Descent in 2012, and we have noticed no political will. After 2011, in 2013, there was a resolution to come with a decade for people of African descent with the aim to raise political will to implement the Durban Declaration and the program of action. Then we had a decade from 2024 to 2015 until 2024. Because of lack of political will, we have seen that, we have noticed that despite the mechanism, the instruments that was putting in place and adopted by the member states, still no political will to implement the Durban Declaration and the program of action. January 2025, the International Decade for People of African Descent was expanded to until 2034. And why I bring this up, what I have done is to let you see that 1900 we were talking about racism. There were instruments, mechanisms, no political will. After 100 years, we are still talk about how we are going to implement all these mechanisms, the instrument, the resolution, the declaration that came after the declaration of the transatlantic trafficking of African people and slavery has declared as a crime against humanity. The basis, in fact, the basis where we have articles that were adopted and related to reparatory justice. So I therefore recommend to declare 2026 as a year of remembrance and renewal commemorating the 25th anniversary of the United Nations World Conference Against Racism and the Durban Program of Action, situating racial justice as the fundamental component of reparatory justice and amplifying the ongoing struggle against systemic racism, discrimination, and colonial legacy as integral to the global African reparation movement. A solid campaign starting from today with regards to the 25th anniversary of the DDPA in 26. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Biekmanm. I've now found the correct piece of paper, which would have told me that you are a pan-Africanist who's well known for your successful human rights activism, and you've been doing this for nearly 5 decades. And in Suriname, you involved in the student movement, and later in the Netherlands, you became one of the freedom fighters and activists for political independence in Suriname. Thank you so much for your contribution.
Education is preparation for reparations.